It had been a year since I was locked out of my family home. A year since my mother and stepfather Ben had turned their backs on me, believing the web of lies spun by my half-sister Katie. Even now, the pain was fresh, like an open wound that refused to heal. Katie's manipulation had shattered my life, and I often wondered how things could have gone so wrong. Katie had always been the center of attention, ever since she was born. My mother and Ben treated her like she was untouchable, a golden child who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the responsible older sister. I tried to fill that role, even though Katie and I had never truly gotten along. When we were kids, I endured her tantrums and her constant need to be the favorite. I didn't expect much gratitude, but I never imagined she would go so far as to destroy my life. It all began with whispers, little insinuations that Katie dropped into conversations with my mother. "Jenny's been acting strange lately," she would say, her tone dripping with concern. At first, my mother brushed it off, but Katie was relentless. She started claiming that I was staying out late, hanging around questionable people. Slowly but surely, she planted seeds of doubt in their minds. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The day everything fell apart was etched in my memory like a scar. My mother had called me, her voice tense and distant. "Jenny, we need to talk. Come over." I arrived at the house, unaware that I was walking into an ambush. Ben sat on the sofa, arms crossed, his expression severe. My mother stood nearby, her face tight with worry. And then there was Katie, sitting with an air of innocence that made my blood boil. "Katie found something concerning in your room," my mother began, her voice shaking slightly. "She says you're using drugs." The accusation hit me like a slap. "What? That's ridiculous. I've never touched drugs in my life," I protested, looking from my mother to Ben, searching for a shred of belief in their eyes. But their expressions remained cold. Katie interjected, her voice soft and full of false concern. "I didn't want to say anything, but I've been so worried about you, Jenny. I found something in your room when you stayed over last weekend. I'm only trying to help." Her words were a dagger to my heart. I knew she was lying. Katie hadn't been near my room, let alone found anything incriminating. Yet, her performance was flawless. My mother's doubt deepened, and Ben's scowl grew harsher. "Jenny," Ben said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Katie also mentioned that you've been associating with shady people. Are you selling yourself for money?" My breath caught in my throat. The accusation was so vile, so far removed from who I was, that I could barely find the words to respond. "No! How can you even ask me that?" I cried. "Katie is lying. Can't you see what she's doing?" But my protests fell on deaf ears. Katie's tears and trembling voice had already sealed their judgment. My mother looked at me with a mix of pity and disbelief. "Jenny, if you're struggling, we want to help. But you need to be honest with us." "I'm not struggling. Katie is making this up because she hates me," I shouted, my frustration boiling over, but my words only seemed to confirm their suspicions. Ben stood up, his tone final. "Until you're ready to take responsibility, you're not welcome here." And just like that, I was cast out. My family, the people who were supposed to stand by me, had chosen Katie's lies over the truth. As I left the house, my mind raced with disbelief. How could they believe her so easily? What had I done to deserve this? Katie didn't stop there. She spread her lies throughout the town, weaving a narrative that painted me as a dangerous, unreliable person. The rumors reached my boss, who called me into his office one day. "Jenny, I'm sorry, but we can't keep someone with your issues on staff." I lost my job. My friends stopped returning my calls, wary of the whispers they'd heard. I became a pariah, isolated and alone. Everywhere I turned, I was met with suspicion and judgment. Katie had taken everything from me, my family, my job, my reputation, and she reveled in it, basking in the sympathy and attention her lies had garnered. In the months that followed, I moved to a new city, desperate to escape the shadow of Katie's deceit. I found a modest apartment and a job as a barista at a small cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I tried to rebuild my life, piece by piece, but the scars remained. Every time I thought about my family, a knot of anger and sorrow tightened in my chest. Then, one day, Chris walked into the cafe. Chris, Katie's ex-boyfriend, the one she'd dated during the height of her campaign against me. Seeing him brought back a flood of painful memories, but I forced a polite smile. "Chris, long time no see. What brings you here?" He hesitated, his nervous energy palpable. "I know this is out of the blue, but I needed to talk to you," he said. "I need to clear my conscience." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Chris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Everything Katie said about you, the drugs, the other stuff, it was all lies. She made it up. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." His words hit me like a tidal wave. For so long I had known the truth, but hearing it confirmed by someone else was both validating and infuriating. "Why didn't you say anything?" I demanded. "You could have stopped her. You could have saved me." Chris looked down, shame written across his face. "I didn't realize how far she'd taken it. She's always been complicated, jealous of you. She wanted the spotlight, and she didn't care who got hurt." I wanted to scream, to lash out at him for his silence. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, and no apology could undo it. "Just go," I said quietly, turning away. Chris left, but his words lingered. Katie's jealousy had fueled her lies, and my family had been so eager to believe her. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. As the years passed, I managed to rebuild a semblance of a life. I found a new job, made a few friends, and even fell in love. Paul was kind and understanding, a steady presence in my tumultuous world. When he proposed, I felt a glimmer of hope that I could finally leave the past behind. But the past had a way of creeping back. 6 months before the wedding, I received an email from my mother. Her words were filled with regret. She admitted they had been wrong to believe Katie and begged for a chance to make amends. "I want to see you as a bride," she wrote. The email stirred a storm of emotions. I shared it with Paul, who listened quietly before saying, "This is your decision. You don't owe them anything, but if you want to try, I'll support you." After much deliberation, I replied, inviting my mother to the wedding, but making it clear that Katie and Ben were not welcome. Her response came in the form of a phone call. "Jenny, Katie is your sister. She's changed. If you don't invite her, I can't come either." I felt the familiar sting of betrayal. "You're choosing her over me again," I said, my voice shaking. "After everything she's done?" "It's not about choosing sides," my mother insisted. "It's about healing as a family." "No," I replied firmly. "When I needed you, you weren't there. I won't let you ruin this for me." And with that, I ended the call. On my wedding day, as I stood at the altar with Paul, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My mother in Katie's absence no longer felt like a loss. Instead, it was a reminder of the strength I had found within myself. Months later, I received another message from Ben. "Katie attempted suicide. She's in the hospital. Please, we need you." His voice was filled with desperation, but I couldn't ignore the bitterness that rose in me. Paul held me close that night, his steady presence grounding me. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "You've done enough." I decided not to visit Katie. I had spent too long carrying the weight of her actions, and I wasn't going to let guilt pull me back into the chaos. Over time, the calls and messages from my family dwindled. I built a new life with Paul, free from the shadows of my past. Katie's lies had taken so much from me, but they hadn't destroyed me. I had survived, and in doing so, I had found something stronger. Myself.